Heyo, it is, well, for me it's Thursday afternoon at about 1:30, but you're probably listening to this on Friday because this is my discussion of Kafka's story, A Report to an Academy. And I think this story is actually kind of funny. Let's get into it. First of all, this story is overall basically just the story of how an ape turns himself into a human. And so there's a kind of a metamorphosis, a change in this story. And Kafka wrote a lot about changes and metamorphoses. In fact, his most famous story is The Metamorphosis, which we will read next. But this is a good preparation for that story. Kafka uses kind of this essay format for this story. So the narrator is this former ape, now human, quote unquote human, who is reporting to an academy. And in this sense, an academy is like a scientific community, a group of scientists or doctors who are studying something. So he's reporting to them about how it was that he turned himself from an ape into a human. And so that's what we have in front of us, is his report. And so it's important to note that the narrator of the story or the report is actually the ape human. And so on the first page, we'll see that his writing style is very sophisticated, right? It's got sophisticated diction and syntax. The first couple lines of the report lay that out pretty clearly. He says, "Honored members of the Academy, you have done me the honor of inviting me to give your Academy an account of the life I formerly led as an ape. I regret that I cannot comply with your request to the extent you desire." So, as you can tell, this ape human has achieved absolute complete humanity in terms of his speech, right? He's mastered what we would call civilized discourse. So he's not like, mostly ape who's kind of like just can do sign language or is like, can put on a shirt, but he's like fully civilized in his speech and his thinking. And that's important because we're going to see what that means for what a human is. Okay, so look at my notes here. Okay, so keep in mind again that he is now human and now he is civilized. And I think that really one of the big ideas of this story is that Kafka is kind of satirizing or cynically saying what a human really is, or what civilization is. And he's not a big fan. He doesn't think it's that great. Okay, so the next thing I want to point out is that this ape, whose name is Red Peter, he chooses to become a human because, as he says, it is his only way out. And what he means by that is that he's actually been put in a cage by humans, and he's being transported somewhere on a ship, and he wants out of his cage. So he says he means that he would prefer to stay an ape, but because of his situation, he decides to become a human. It's his only way out. He says, let's see, "But over and above it all, only the one feeling, no way out. Of course, what I felt then as an ape I can represent now only in human terms, and therefore I misrepresent it. But although I cannot reach back to the truth of the old ape life, there is no doubt that it lies somewhere in the direction I have indicated. Until then I had so many ways out of everything, and now I had none. I was pinned down. Had I been nailed down, my right to free movement would not have been lessened." So, again, he'd rather be an ape, but because of his situation, he chooses to become human. And then he makes this really important point where he says that he is not choosing freedom. Freedom, he says, would have been to stay an ape. Apes have way more freedom than humans. but he needed a way out. So he has to give up some of his freedom, the freedom of apishness, to become one of these civilized humans that have very little freedom. He says, I fear that perhaps you do not quite understand what I mean by way out. I use the expression in its fullest and most popular sense. I deliberately do not use the word freedom. I do not mean the spacious feeling of freedom on all sides. As an ape, perhaps, I knew that, and I have met men who yearn for it. But for my part, I desired such freedom neither then nor now. So, essentially, he's saying, when I say I was looking for a way out, I'm not saying freedom, because being a human is not freedom. Later on, he says, and that too is human freedom, I thought, self-controlled movement. What a mockery of Holy Mother Nature. So this idea that when humans think of freedom, what they think of is self-controlled movement, and that's not real freedom, because an ape would know. An ape has real freedom. So he chooses to become a human, to give up his freedom so that he has a way out of this cage. And so he goes about becoming a human. And it's important, I think, to note how he becomes a human, what the process is. So he transforms himself into a human, and he takes it step by step. The first thing he learns to be human is to spit, right? He spits at this guy who comes to visit him at his cage, and they spit at each other. Then he learns to smoke, and then he learns to drink alcohol. And then, after he does all of those things, then he can speak like a human. And then finally, after he learns to speak like a human, then he can act. And like literally, like perform an act to amuse humans. And so Kafka seems to be kind of in a joking and kind of a cynical way that what makes a human and not an ape is that they can spit, smoke, drink alcohol, speak, and be fake, perform, right? And so this whole like story that Kafka has created is really just a slam on what civilization means. What separates humans from apes? It's all of these things that are terrible, actually, right? Being fake and having bad habits that are not natural. So for that reason, I would say that this is a really, really funny story in kind of a dark, cynical way. And the two takeaways I get from it are, number one, that being a human is the opposite of being free, or at least being a civilized human is the opposite of being free. And number two, that civilized humanity is separated from the natural world in the sense that we are way worse than the natural world. So that's kind of fun. Now, you could read the story in a lot of different ways other than that. In fact, if you go online and you Google this story, you'll probably find a bunch of other interpretations of it. But that's kind of how I read the story. And I'd be curious to hear how you read it as well. So if you have a different take on it and you want to throw it in the comments for me, that's cool. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to reading your journal about it. Okay, have a good day.